They'll never have a time where they don't remember being
Yeah.
at that level of reading.
Yeah.
I hate them for it. I'm
Yeah.
super jealous. Because, I didn't have that either. Or rather, I had that reaction.
Right.
All right, so we're going to start with a bit from Horace and then a bit from the Gospel of John. And we'll see kind of what we remember and what looks terrifyingly weird and see where we are. Take some questions. And then the great thing about this month's chapter is it really only has one concept, which is a very helpful English grammar concept and a very helpful Latin grammar concept. But it's just one idea. So I think it'll give us another month to kind of get some reps and get some practice and get some of that kind of underfoot. So first from Horace's Ode 1, or Book 1, Ode 11 in Book 1. He says, Tu ne quaesieris scire nefas, quem mihi quem tibi finem di dederent. So take a second, and I'll take this, kind of make this comment before we start is, this is poetry. And what we'll see even with the structure, the syntax of the words, is pretty different from what we would expect in a narrative or a more straightforward writing like John's Gospel. So first, let's start off. Do you see anything that looks like a verb or some form of a verb?
Future perfect deterrent.
Deterrent, yeah. Yeah, deterrent here. Future perfect, that's right. Coming from do, dare, dedi, datum. So, I won't translate the subject, but something will have been given, or will be given. Sometimes future perfects you can kind of translate as a simple future. Something will be given.
Is it like a list of things?
It's not a list of things. Although, what made you think it was a list, perhaps?
Because of the mihi and the TV, like it's...
Good. It looks like we have some kind of parallel construction. Quem mihi quem tibi. And sure enough, you do.
Okay.
But it's not a list. Or I wouldn't call it a list.
Yeah.
Anything else look like a verb? Or look like something you recognize?
The eris is a verb. Future perfect also.
Yeah, there's another one. Quaesieris. Another future perfect. Here, with ne, we haven't learned ne yet, but ne is the way to negate, or to give, in this case, a negative command. So it's literally, you should not seek, or do not seek after.
What is the one word that it starts like the beginning of a sentence to say it's a question?
Oh, that would be the enclitic ne.
It's different
So
word.
ne is long. Ne, for example, like amasne. Oops, pardon. Amasne. Do you love? Or like anasnene. Do you love me?
Okay.
So this is a separate word, not an enclitic, and it's used to negate. You can do a negative imperative.
Okay.
So you should not seek.
So why don't you use none?
You can't use known to negate an imperative or a subjunctive. Known is only for negating an indicative verb.
Okay.
How about scire? What does that look like? Scire.
Is that a command?
It's not a command. What form? I'll tell you it's a form of a verb. And listen to the principal parts. Scio, scire, scivi, scitum.
Then it's an infinitive?
It's the infinitive, yeah. So that's the second principal part of the verb. Scio, scire. What did you say?
That goes with the do dare?
It doesn't actually. So this is standing absolute. It's standing separate grammatically. So here, Horace is writing, what meter is this? I can't remember the meter of the poem, but he's using the breaks in the poem. So it goes long, 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 short, short, long, long, short, short, long, and these are usually set off with a pause. So this nephos means forbidden, or it is forbidden. Scire. That's where we get the word scientia, knowledge. So it is forbidden to know, yeah. So he says, you should not seek. It is forbidden to know. And what should you not seek? And here we go. Our second verb is deterrent. What might be the subject of the verb deterrent? I can see nt, so I can see this as some kind of plural, third person plural.
They.
Okay, so it could be a they, or do I have anything that would work as a nominative plural? And you can kind of go item by item. Go, quem doesn't look right. Mihe doesn't look right. Quem again. Tibe, no.
Phenom or D.
Phenom or D. So which of those, if I made you pick, which of those look like it's a nominative plural?
D.
It is D.
The gods.
The gods, that's right. So if you look it up in the, if you look it up in the dictionary, you would see deus, dei. But most often when we find the nominative plural, we don't find dei, we find D.
Really?
And that's called contraction. The E has contracted out. The same thing happens, for example, if you said my son. For example, I love you, son. It comes from philios, so we would expect the vocative to be us becoming
E? No.
yeah, us becoming E. So what we would expect would be philia, but that's awkward. We don't do that. We say phili. So there's that contraction again, the I-E coming together. Here we have the E and the I coming together. Dei becoming D. So the gods give, and they give a phenom. And this one, if you know French cinema, you can get it. Or at the end of like a classic bit of cinema. You don't have to know French cinema. I don't know anything about French cinema. What do you put at the end of a movie?
The finale.
Yeah, a finale, or haven't you ever seen that at the end and it just says fin?
Oh.
The end.
Yeah.
So a finis, you can hear the word finish in there, a finis is an end, or a goal. So the Greek, finis is the equivalent of the Greek word telos. An end, a goal, which could be an end in the sense that it's the end of the race and you're done, but it could also be the end in that it's the goal that you're aiming for. So it can kind of have both meanings. But here, notice we have the gods giving an end. The gods give an end. Okay, so what we have, in leaving this out so far, what we have is, you should not seek. It is forbidden to know the end the gods give, or the end the gods will give. Okay? So far, phenom is doing this double duty. You should not seek the end. The gods give the end. So phenom is kind of doing double duty. But you're going to see phenom is actually not quite doing double duty because it's got help from relative pronouns. Quem and quem.
That's a pronoun?
Those are relative pronouns.
What does
Okay?
that mean?
So let's talk about what that means. Because this is what this whole chapter is about. Relative pronouns, they work, first of all, as pronouns. So what's a pronoun?
Takes place of a noun.
Pro in place of, nomen, noun. It takes the place of a noun. So it's a pronoun. So let's just think for a second before we get into the relative bit. What is the rule that governs pronoun use in English and in Latin? For example, my dad works hard. I love him. Not, my dad works hard, I love he, or my dad works hard, I love she, or...
Accusative.
Okay, so think about this. Pronoun, what does it take from its antecedent?
It's gender and number.
Good. So the pronoun must always match the antecedent. And antecedent, by the way, comes from the Latin word ante, meaning before, and cadere, meaning I fall. So literally, the antecedent is the word that falls before the pronoun. Okay? So the pronoun takes from its antecedent its gender and its number. So my dad, obviously, the proper pronoun for my dad would be he or his or him, not she or her, nor they or they, they or their or them. So gender and number come from the antecedent. Where does case come from? For example, I love my dad. We are going to his house. Where does case come from for a pronoun?
Does it depend on the function in the sentence?
Good, yeah. So we would say that while the gender and number come from the antecedent, the case comes from its clause. Clausal context. It could be a phrase also, but from its immediate context. So just like in English, whether it's he or him or his, that is not coming from the antecedent. The case is coming from the pronoun's immediate context. Okay? This same thing is happening in Latin. Okay? And this is one of the hardest things now for pronouns, but a special kind of pronoun, the much often abused, the relative pronoun. Who and which. Who and which. Because it is a personal pronoun that introduces what's called a relative clause. A relative clause. Okay? So for example, go back to this English sentence. My dad, comma, blank I love,
Whom?
moved.
Yeah, I think this is not good in English for me either.
Yes. So here we go. Is my dad a who or a which? First of all, right? Is he a neuter or a masculine or feminine?
Ooh.
Masculine or feminine.
He would be masculine or feminine. But now we have to ask, so we've kind of decided on who, because English doesn't have all these sub-options here. Now we have to look at its clause and say, blank I love. Who I love? Is who the subject of love?
No.
Whose I love? Is it a possessor? No. Whom object, right? Whom I love. I love whom? I love him, right? Okay. So this is where in English, we'll find our English grammar being stretched probably just as much as our Latin grammar being stretched. Okay. Now this is where the famous Winston Churchill quote comes in about, prepositions dangling off the end of words. That is something up with which I shall not put. And it's ugly and it's clunky, but what Churchill and what the rule's about is it's really about protecting our pronoun use, right? So my father, with whom I played basketball. But if I said, my father, this is what we would do. We would say, who I played basketball with, but that with needs to come with whom.
So does whom go with accusative or with object of the preposition?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So in English, actually, let me pause that and we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Actually, no, we can do it now. That's fine. Whom, if we remember this kind of simple idea, he, his, and him, or I, my, and me, same thing would apply to who, whose, and whom. Where we can see the top line, who, he, and I, those are all subject pronouns, right? The second line are all possessive pronouns. The third line are all what? How could whom or him or me, how could those work?
Accusative.
Okay, so it could be a direct object. What else could it be in English?
Object of preposition.
It could be an OP, right? To whom, to him, to me. So direct object, object of the preposition. How about watch? I gave him the ball.
Oh, indirect object.
Indirect objects, okay. So in English, kind of in English in the days of the dinosaurs, so to speak, we had a subjective case, a possessive case, and what we could call our objective case. Because of our direct object, our object of a preposition, and our indirect object. Okay? Same thing happening with they, their, and them. Same thing, except for she, her, her. There we have the same pronoun twice. Okay? All right. So back to Horace. Horace says, do not seek, it is forbidden to know. And now we can see that quem, and I'll tell you, that is an accusative singular. Accusative singular. And there's another one, accusative singular. Do not seek quem mihi, quem tibi. And mihi and tibi are both dative personal pronouns.
For me.
To me or for me, to you or for you.
How do you know? I had a lot of trouble with that. Like, how do you pick?
You just have to pick it based on which seems like it's the best with the verb. So, for example, the verb here is deterrent. Watch. You should not seek the end, which the gods gave to me, which the gods get, or will give to you. So here it wouldn't be for you. The gods don't give an end for you.
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of. The gods would give an end to you. So to put it all together, you should not seek the end. It is forbidden to know. And this is where it's weird to have phenom doing this double duty kind of, because it's ending this. You should not seek the end, but it's the antecedent for the relative pronoun which comes before it. Because poetry. So it says, you should not seek. It is forbidden to know the end which the gods will give to me and which the gods will give to you. So what's Horace saying?
Don't try to figure out the future of the goals.
Be patient. Don't try to figure out the future. What's actually interesting, and see if you can figure out what he's warning against. Listen to the next line. So it says, Tu ne quae siris scire nefas quem mihi quem tibe. Finem diderent, and then he says his friend's name, Leo Conoe. Now listen. Nec Babylonios temptaris numeros.
The death?
Babylon.
Babylon?
Wait, say it again.
Numerous temptation.
Ooh, good guess with numeros. Good, but listen again. Babylonios temptaris numeros. Babylonios numeros.
The number of the Babylonians?
The Babylonian numbers. So literally he says, and do not be tempted, or do not attempt the Babylonian numbers. What's he talking about?
Like tarot card, kind of like...
That's exactly right. He's talking about astrology.
Yeah.
So Horace was a pagan Roman, and he's counseling his friend, don't waste your time with horoscope reading.
Huh.
Yeah, astrology. So don't bother, trying to read the blood moon, I guess, last night and figure out,
Did
the
you see
particular
it?
ending.
I
I did not in Greenville. Did you all see the moon where you were at?
Yes.
We did not. We had complete cloud cover. It's still have cloud cover, I think. We haven't seen a star in 5 days. So there's Horace's warning. Do not seek the end which the gods have given or will give to me or to you. It is forbidden to know.
So quem is which? How would you
Which.
say whom?
It just depends what its antecedent is.
It's
So
the same word.
That's exactly right. It just depends in English. So for example, in English, the end, we would say end is a neuter word, right? It. In Latin, finis is a masculine word. So it takes a masculine relative pronoun.
So it's just the endings will change.
That's exactly right. And that's what the whole lesson is taking relative pronouns and then matching them to their antecedents. But before we do that, we're going to do one more passage here. So this is from Secundum Johannem, the Evangelium Secundum Johannem, the Gospel according to John. Okay, this is verse 3. He says, John writes, Omnia per ipsum facta sunt, et sine ipso factum est nihil quod factum est. So what do you see? What do you notice?
Omnia probably means all.
Omnia exactly means all, everything. It's actually a neuter plural form. So everything or all.
Nihil is nothing.
Good. Nihil is nothing. How about anybody think they see a verb somewhere?
Est.
Yeah,
Sunt,
and the
est.
factums. Facta.
Good. We got facta, factum, and factum with sunt, est, and est. Now this is actually 2 lessons out, but these are all perfect passives. Perfect passives. Now that's next week's grammar lesson, so I don't want to get bogged down into it. But in a nutshell, the difference between an active verb and a passive verb is that in an active verb, the subject does the verb, right? In a passive verb, the subject receives the verb. So in an active verb, I make everything. In a passive verb, everything was made. Was made. Perfect passive. So everything was made, and then we have per ipsum.
Through him.
through him. Good. Now this is a demonstrative, ipse, ipsa, ipsum. Does anybody remember what the antecedent is of that, or what the referent is of that demonstrative?
Word.
The word, the verbum. That's exactly right. So all of these hymns, again, actually, this would be a good example of where in Latin, the word verbum, verbi, does anybody, oops, sorry, I'm not supposed to use red because it doesn't show up very well in the video. I learned. Okay, the Latin word verbum, verbi, what declension is that? E.
Second declension neuter.
Second declension neuter. So if we wanted to be, we shouldn't do this, this would be heresy, by side note. But in English, for a word, this is a neuter, we would think it, right? It's neuter, it, not a he and not a she. But of course our Trinitarian theology would inform us here, and instead of translating everything was made through it, the word, of course we take on John's understanding of saying everything was made through him, the word. So here you actually have a neuter pronoun in Latin, but we're going to make it he in English. Up above we had a masculine relative pronoun, which we translated as a neuter relative pronoun. So you always have to figure out, okay, what is the language I'm going into? How does it work? So even I was reading a book this weekend, and now this is a very super hyper-modern, postmodern thing to do, but they didn't even call it with a new translation by so-and-so. It said, with a new interpretation by so-and-so. Because when you translate, you are interpreting the text. And that's true, but I think you can still call it a translation, and that's reasonable. Okay, so anyway, here at the beginning. Everything was made through him. Et sine.
Without.
Good. Without ipso.
Him.
Without him. So there it is again. That's that neuter demonstrative. It's basically working as a pronoun here. Without him, factum est nihil.
Nothing was made.
Good. Nothing was made. There's that passive again. Nothing was made. Here's our relative pronoun. And let's ask the question, what is the antecedent of the relative pronoun quod? Nothing was made without him. Quod factum est.
That was made.
Good, that was made, or which was made. Nothing, let's think about this one in English. And nothing, or pardon me, and without him, nothing was made. Oh, sorry, and without him, nothing was made. That was made. Which was made? Is it an essential clause or a non-essential clause? That's the question in English grammar. An essential clause, the sister that I hate got thrown out of the house. Nothing that was made. It's that, because it's an essential clause. That's, yeah. Okay, anyway, that's how I learned that teaching seniors at NCA, because I never knew that rule. Okay, so nothing that was made, right, is what we're missing. So without him, nothing was made that was made. Okay? So quad, look at this form, and let's think about this. Nothing was made that was made. What case does quad have to be in? That was made. Yeah, so what case in Latin?
Nominative?
Nominative, yeah. That, sure enough, is the nominative, neuter, nominative singular, because nihil is neuter. So it takes its gender and its number from nihil, but it takes its case from its own clause. That was made.
Can I ask a question? Like, we'll get into this, I know, but like, if the est and the sunt are translated, how come the facta and the factums, like what, like? Yes,
yeah. So it actually would work the same way in English. So watch. The dinners were made. Dinner was made. In English, the made didn't change, but actually, if you pay attention to it, the participle went from singular to plural, or rather from plural to singular. The dinners were made, plural. Dinner was made. So this is actually what's called a perfect passive participle made. This is a perfect passive participle made. So the form has changed in Latin to match. We're not quite here yet. But anyway, the form is changing, but in English, what we'll see won't change. And that's just a good example of how some of the English imprecisions Latin doesn't let you get away with, really. Because here it's omnia facta sunt, everything was made. Now we've got and nothing was made, and then we've got that was made.
Does the est, the factum, and the est, they're independent of each other, sort of?
Yes, what we have here is a participle, which is a verbal adjective. So it abides by the adjective rule. Adjectives always match the noun they modify in gender, case, and number.
Oh, okay.
And then we have our verb sunt, which is governed by person and number. So everything, or all things, were.
Okay.
Or here, nothing was.
Okay.
And I know that's the present form of some, but perfect passive participle plus the present form of some equals the perfect passive indicative. That's many chapters down the line. Oh, not many, but it's down the line. So I've got to go over. Kate, did you have a question?
Yeah, John, Mr. Report. On
Yes.
quad, you said it was nominative, neuter, and what else?
In singular. So neuter and singular are coming off of nihil, and then nominative is coming off of what it's doing in its own clause.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So, if you will, flip open your books to chapter 17. We're going to look at the declensions of these. And there's actually a very funny, but definitely like PG-13 or R-rated British comedian who has a whole like stand-up bit about the Romans and these words and others. About pretty much with the Romans, everything sounds like quibus, quai, quam, quo, quo, quai, qui, cur, anyway, so growing up in a British boarding school. So anyway, so on the declension there in chapter 17, let's look at the headings, and then I want to point out some things that we saw last year that we can kind of continue to refresh our mind on. So first of all, the singulars, qui, quai, quad. So we just saw quad, the neuter nominative singular. Qui, masculine, quai, feminine, nominative singular, and quad. Okay, so let's review a couple of things. One is, let's look at the neuter forms first, since we just saw quad. Notice, or remember, neuter forms are always identical in what cases? Look at them. Where are they identical?
Dative and ablative?
No. Oh, well, that's true. I'm sorry. Dative and ablative, actually, for all of them, are pretty much the same. At least in the plurals, right? Quibus, 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 quibus. But neuter forms are always the same. Think about it. Think about your second declension neuter or your third declension neuter. Where are those neuter forms the same? And you see it here again.
Nominative, accusative?
Good. Nominative, accusative, and vocative, which they don't include the vocative because you really never see a vocative relative pronoun. But anyway, you see the identical forms always in the nominative and accusative. And that's tricky because when you see a neuter relative pronoun, of course, you have to know, wait a second, is this an object, a direct object, or is this the nominative subject of its clause, its relative clause? The answer is you don't know. Of course, you have to look at context. The form itself isn't going to tell you. Okay. The second thing that we can observe, looking at the masculine, the feminine, and the neuter, look at the genitive singular form. Does that look familiar at all?
It doesn't look like the quad.
It does not look anything kind of like what precedes it. Look at the dative singular. Cuius and cui. Cuius and cui. Does that look like anything you've seen before? Oh man, this might hurt our brain. It's actually, do you remember that list of special adjectives and pronouns and demonstratives?
Like hic and all that?
The eos, yeah. So hic, for example, goes hic, huius, huic. Or ille, just to do some masculines, ille, ilius, illic. No, pardon. Alter, alterius, or alterius, pardon me, alteri. So when we see a relative pronoun, qui, quai, quad, it's actually not surprising to see that it falls into this special eos category where so many of our special adjectives, demonstratives, and other pronouns fall. Cuius, cui. And if we can kind of keep that in mind, actually, if you look at everything else, it looks kind of like what you'd expect it to. Quem maybe is a little odd, but it still looks like an accusative singular a bit. Quo, okay. In the plurals, e odrum ibus os ibus. That's only odd, but think about why is that odd. E odrum ibus os ibus. It almost like should hurt your brain to say it. What is that? What's that a combination of?
It's a combination of masculine second declension and third declension masculine.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what we see in those plurals is we see a bit of two declensions kind of coming through. We see the e, odrum, and os of second declension masculine. But then we see the ibus, so to speak, of the third declension is what we would think of it as. But even then, we can kind of look at it and go, yeah, that looks like a dative, and quibus, quos, looks like that should be an accusative plural ending. Okay? And so the biggest thing, really, the most significant thing in this chapter is to really memorize those forms, because they're so common in Latin. Latin loves relative clauses. Just loves it. They'd much rather introduce a relative clause than a sentence break and give you more information. Okay? These truths which we hold to be self-evident. And so you'll actually see it if you read the founders. They love relative clauses, and that's because this is what they're really raised on. That's right. We look at it and we say that's a run-on. They look at it and go, no, that's a meaty, hearty 8-line sentence. You know, like, please put a period somewhere. I'm losing you. I lost you at the third which, or to whom, or for whom, or whatever.
Can I ask, why did the Latin people, why is it C instead of the Q? Why did they switch that?
I don't know.
Oh.
I really don't know. Yeah, morphology, which is the study of the actual form itself, to say the least, that is not my forte. From Latin, fortis, meaning strength. It's
nice.
not. Yeah, there you go. All right. Any questions so far from Kate and Russ? All right. Well, let's look at some sentences here. I'm showing on page 111. Okay. At the very top, we see an English sentence. The woman whom you are praising is talented. The woman whom you are praising is talented. So what's the relative pronoun in English?
Whom.
Whom. Good. So our relative clause would be whom you are praising. And this is actually helpful because we can actually see very clearly that a relative clause is an adjectival clause because it's giving us more information about what noun in this instance. The woman, right. So what we actually see is, it's very clear that that's an adjectival subordinate clause because it's telling us more about this woman. Okay? An adverbial clause, of course, would be giving us more information about the verb, like when it happens. In the nick of time, she sprang into action. She sprang in the nick of time. So here we can see that a relative clause is functioning as an adjectival clause.
Always, right?
Always.
Yeah.
Because it's always coming off of that noun.
Yeah.
Some kind of noun. Okay? Now in English, this is important to think about. Less so for Latin, but the Romans would do it very, very often. Look in English there real quick. The woman whom you are praising is talented. In English, in the sentence, where does the relative clause need to come?
After the noun.
Yeah, after the noun that it's coming relative from, right? Because, for example, if you said something like, the woman, you, who are a big jerk, are praising, they are obviously, now we've switched the head noun of this, or the antecedent of this relative pronoun. So in English and in Latin, 99 times out of 100, they're going to put it right after. Though, for example, we had nihil quod factum est, nothing that was made. In our poetry, that's where they get to get a little more creative. So here we go. The woman whom you are praising. So let's just think about this in Latin. What gender would whom have to be?
Feminine.
Feminine, good. What number would whom have to be?
Singular.
Singular. Now we have to ask the question, what case would whom have to be? Whom you are praising.
Accusative.
It would have to be accusative. So what is the feminine accusative singular relative pronoun?
Feminine. Quam.
Yeah, quam. Quam. So we would have, quam. And then, can anybody give me, you are praising? I'll give you femina.
Okay. Are praising. Hold on. Don't tell me.
Femina, quam.
It's from laudere.
It's from laudo laudare. You are praising.
It'd be the
Laudabont.
No, that would be were praising. Or laudabos would be you were praising.
Laudabot.
He was praising.
No, I am running.
Did you get?
I was
You are praising.
running.
You are
Loud.
praising.
Laudabos.
No.
No, that would be you were praising. It's just present. You are praising.
Laudabut.
No, just present.
Loud.
Laudo laudare.
Okay, hold on. You. Loud. Oh. Laudas.
Laudas is correct. Good. There you go, Russ. Russ jumps in with the one answer and it's right. Good. So we've got femina quam laudas
Like everything but the right one.
is talented. What do they want for talented? Sorry. Docta. Sorry. So we got est docta.
So the est goes with what?
You tell me.
The woman?
The woman, yeah. So our simple
Oh,
sentence
yeah.
would be, right, the woman is talented.
Okay.
And then we can see, and actually when you start translating some of these exercises, or some of these sentences for exercises, what I really encourage you to do is I encourage you to like bracket out of your mind, and even when I would teach like 10th graders and 9th graders and we'd start to really read Caesar, we would even cover it. Mm-hmm. Because the simple sentence is easy. The woman is talented. But because we don't often say things like, the woman whom you are praising is talented, it can start to feel overwhelmed. We can kind of get lost in the weeds. So I encourage you the first time through the sentence, again, keep it simple. You've got a relative plus a verb, just block it out of your mind and see if you can do the simple sentence around it. And then add more information about whatever the antecedent noun is, right? Because we've got an easy, simple sentence. The woman is talented. And then which woman? The woman whom you are praising is talented. Okay. All right. Let's look at another one here. Down at the bottom. Down at the bottom. Let's look at, I've got it numbered as sentence 1. Diligo puellum quae ex Italia venet. Now I know they have the translation right there, which is helpful for us. But, of course, we've got our relative pronoun quae. Here's the question first. What is the antecedent of the relative pronoun quae? And you can use the English translation, or to challenge yourself, you could look at the actual form of quae. Quae.
Feminine singular.
Okay, so we look at quae and we see that is a feminine singular. Although it could be a neuter plural.
Oh, you're right.
So we do have multiple options. Which is it?
Feminine singular.
It is feminine singular. So we can see that what is the antecedent of quae? In Latin, what's the antecedent?
Puella.
Yeah, puellum. Yeah, so we get our feminine singular from the antecedent, and we get our case. What case is quae in? If it's feminine singular, what case is quae in?
Nominative.
Yeah. So if it is in the nominative, what is the relative pronoun quae doing in its clause? If it's nominative, and it is.
What do you mean?
So if quae is in the nominative, what is its job in its clause?
Subject.
That's right. So that's our subject pronoun, our subject, relative pronoun, subject pronoun. And of course, then you can see in your translation, right? The girl who came. Quae venit. The girl who came.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Like, So in this case, it's like the girl is the accusative.
In the main clause,
Right.
in the independent clause.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, so does that affect?
In no way does it affect it. In no way does it affect it.
Because on the first one, it was the subject of the sentence and it was a clause.
That's exactly right. So they could be the same. For example, the girl is beautiful. Which girl? The girl who came from Italy. That would be fine. So they can match in case, but they do not have to match in case. Okay? So this, what we're talking about here, just to kind of think back in the big picture scheme of things as we're interpreting, is what we're really talking about are independent and subordinate clauses.
Independent being like the original sentence, and then the
That's right. So we could think of that as a main clause, right? It's superordinate versus an independent, or pardon me, subordinate or dependent clause. And you can always think of this because it depends on the main clause for its meaning.
Right.
It's underneath it, right? Because who came from Italy, only if that's an interrogative is that a complete sentence.
Unless you're a third grade boy.
Unless you're a third grade boy, and in which case it's still incomplete, but it's wrong. So your age has nothing to do with whether or not the English language thinks that's a complete sentence. Okay. Flip over to practice and review number 1, and let's try some of these together. They may go a little slowly, but that's all right. I won't mind. So, let me copy down sentence 1. We look at a sentence. I'm telling you guys, there's still times when I get overwhelmed when I look at a sentence for the first time. I'm like, oh wait, come on, just look for your verbs. And it starts to give us structure. So, any verbs that you see? Est. And what did you say? Allunt, yeah. And sure enough, we've got both verbs. When in doubt, and this is almost always true with relative clauses, when you actually see real relative clauses, not including poetry, you almost always see the verb at the end of the relative clause. And this is kind of cool, because if you think about ancient Latin where you don't have true punctuation in a text, or if you're, of course, reading it aloud, right? And just imagine trying to listen to Latin live. The kind of mental gymnastics that your brain is going through. I would imagine even as a native speaker, trying to kind of see some of these ways that case is functioning, for example. But anyway, one of the things that authors would do to kind of signal, hey, we've reached the end of a section or the end of an idea, is you would have a clear start, relative clause, and a clear finish, verb, to a subordinate clause. And that's one way that an author can indicate to their audience, whether it's oral or read Latin, that they are reaching the end of a clause because you have no punctuation. All right, so let's just, for fun, let's ignore the relative clause. Let's just stick, because, 5 words, that's not scary to me. So, patens quaque est vis artium. We can see we've got est, so let's just think, what kind of verb is est?
Singular.
Okay, it's a singular verb. Present what type of verb is it?
Linking verb.
Linking verb. So if it's a linking verb, present tense singular, we got it singular, it means, am I going to look for a nominative singular or a plural?
Nominative singular.
Nominative singular. And am I going to look for one of those or two of those?
Well, two, sort of.
Probably two. Could be one, right? It could say something like, it is good, bonum est. But we could also have two because we have a linking verb. Something equals something else. So let's see, do we have two things in the nominative? We do. What is in the nominative?
Artium and potens. No.
We have potens is in the nominative.
These isn't
It's an adjective. Do you remember what potens means?
powerful.
Powerful, yeah. So it says, powerful is...
Is artium or no?
Listen to the forms of this noun. Ars artis.
Oh.
Ars artis.
Archer skills.
That's then
No.
genitive, sorry.
That's a genitive plural. Artium, of the arts.
I can figure out the
Vis.
What
Vis.
is that?
Vis means strength.
But like, what are the...
The force. Oh, I'm sorry. Not the force, capital F. Sorry. That's different. Vis is an irregular noun, but that's its nominative singular.
Oh, it's
Vis.
third
Powerful
declension.
also is the art of strength.
Not the art of strength. The vis artium. This is your genitive.
Strength of arts.
Okay, good. So powerful also is the force or the strength of the arts. Now we have, and let's like just massage that for a second because we don't want to kind of rush ahead of ourselves. What is this for the independent clause, the main clause saying? Rephrase it.
Art is strong.
There we go. Art is strong, right? The power of the arts, you could say the impact of the arts. Maybe that's a good English translation. The impact of the arts is powerful, is significant. Quaque is kind of a throwaway word here, but also, or so powerful, is the strength of the arts. Now we've got quae. So let's take a second and look at quae and think, okay, what is the antecedent of quae?
Probably artium.
Okay, so we can guess it's artium. One is because it follows immediately after it. So if it were artium, what would quae have to be? So we have to ask, what gender is ars artis? And I'll tell you, that noun is neuter in gender.
Is it third declension?
It is third declension. So what case and number is it here?
Plural.
Artium. It's plural.
Genitive.
And it's genitive. Okay. So pronouns take their gender and number from their antecedents, but their case from their context.
Oh.
So if it's artium as the antecedent, then quae would have to be a neuter plural. Is it a neuter plural?
That does make sense.
It is a neuter plural. Yeah. So now we have to ask, well, what case is quae? And we have to figure that out from its own context. Or from its own clause, its own subordinate clause. So now we kind of start the puzzle again. We've got quae nos semper allunt. What's fun is quae and nos could both be nominatives or accusatives. So what's going to help us decide whether nos is our subject nominative or quae is our subject nominative?
Whatever the verb is.
The verb, allunt. Can nos be the subject of allunt? Can we? No, it cannot. We cannot be the subject of they, right, third person plural, lift. So we've got the strength, the impact of the arts is powerful. Or for Yoda, powerful is the impact of the arts.
And what is allunt?
Alore means I lift or I raise up.
Which lifts us always?
Which always lift us. Yeah. So the arts always lift us. Is kind of the two parts of that, right? Powerful also is the strength or the impact of the arts, which always lift us up. It's actually an interesting definition of art.
Yeah.
Art is that which by definition lifts you up. So if it's, you could say, if you're
It's
reading...
like a double meaning.
What? So,
I don't know. It's talking about strength, which seems to imply like physical lifting,
Yes.
and yet it's
ah,
I don't know.
kind of like a little, a pun,
It's like a-
or like a wordplay
Yeah.
on it's strong and powerful because it lifts us.
But, yeah.
That's true. Absolutely. All right. Let's do one more of those, and then we're going to try to compose one in Latin. So number 2. This is fun. Number 2 is a great example of the kind of a great mistake that we often make as students. Almost always I find the students are tempted when they see miseros homines to try to make it a subject of a sentence. Why should you not do that? Miseros homines.
Because it's accusative.
Yeah, it's accusative. But there's just, I don't know what it is. It's like we see that and we think, oh, I need to make, whatever's first, I need to make my subject.
I don't see any like subordinate cause there.
Okay.
Am I missing the subordinate clause? Where's the like who which or the which?
There is no relative clause here.
Oh, okay.
You're right about
We're
that.
just okay.
Okay. So let's see here what we can remember. We've already got that miseros homines is an accusative. Of course, I couldn't tell that from homines, but I could tell that from miseros. And 99 times out of 100, that's going to go together when they're sitting right next to each other. Especially since autem comes after the couple. What type of word is autem? Anyone remember what we call this? I'll tell you it's placed second, but we would translate it first. It's placed after where it would go.
Post-positive.
Post-positive is right.
Nice.
I did that forever. No,
But you saw that in the dictionary, right?
Yeah.
In the glossary, it'll say, what does it say? Does it say post-P or just
it
post?
said post-positive.
It does say
Yeah.
post-positive, yeah. So that is to say, if you want to use autem correct, this adverbial however, or but, or so, depending on
It has to
context,
come after.
it has to come after the first idea, so to speak. So here we have an adjective and a noun in the accusative, but they're together. So autem is kind of even all the more showing you these go together. Okay. So we have autem kind of dealt with. Now we've got secum jungere coiperant. So do we think we see any verbs? Coiperant is our verb. Can anyone tell me what tense that's in?
I know. Pluperfect.
It is pluperfect. Good. So this one's actually really tricky because it comes from coipo. These principal parts are weird because they're repeating. So we have coipo, coipere, coipi. Coipi coeptum, I think, is the fourth principal part. You can check me on that. But anyway, so if you look, notice our present stem, coip, and our perfect stem, coip, are the same. OE is the diphthong void, right? So anyway, so we would kind of have to say, okay, where in the world would coip get erunt on the end of it? And sure enough, you go through and you go, okay, no, it's not ost, or o is it, emos itis ont. No, it's not es et, emos etis ent, future. It's not abum, abas, abunt, abamos, abatis, abunt, imperfect. So it must be a perfect stem. E is the it, emos istis erunt. No. Ero, eris, erit, eremos, eritis, erint with an I. No. Erum, eros, erat, eramos, eratis, erunt. Pluperfect, active, indicative. They began.
I thought it was like they had.
Oh, I'm sorry. They had begun. You're right. They had begun. Thank you. It is a pluperfect. Now, this is fun in English and in Latin. They had begun.
To. There's
To.
and
They have to have begun to do something. So we've got, sure enough, there it is. Does anybody remember the category of this infinitive? They began to. I ought to. I am able to. What's that category in the infinitive? We need it. Think math terms. 90-degree angles.
Right angle?
Complement
Oh,
is correct. Nice. So we call this a complementary. Remember your spelling here. Though I did see complementary. I was at a restaurant once and they said, have a complimentary piece of pie, but they spelled it with an I. So it was like a piece of pie that would say nice things about you. A complimentary piece of pie. Anyway, versus a complimentary piece of pie that would round out the meal, finish out the meal with an E. So anyway, we have a complementary infinitive. They began to join. Jungo, jungere, like conjugal or conjugation, to join.
With us or something?
Yeah, with themselves. Now remember say, do you remember say? It's a reflexive. Yeah.
I hated that chapter.
So the say always reflects back to the subject. Now. So here we actually don't have an express subject now. They had begun to join miseros homines secum.
The miserable men?
Miserable men with themselves. They had begun to join, and maybe even for clarity's sake in English, we might say, they had begun to join with themselves, or we might even say, to join themselves to miserable men. Because what we want to make explicit and clear in English is this reflexive idea in Latin. So we have to be careful. For example, if we said, they had begun, to join miserable men with themselves, you would think they're kind of like linking up miserable men together. Like, hey, you're a miserable guy, and you're a miserable, worthless guy. You guys link up. They were joining miserable men with themselves. But they're joining it with themselves, the they, of our verb. Okay? Woo! Feel like we're back in Latin?
Yeah.
Officially. All right. Well, for this month, we'll finish up. Let's do all of chapter 17. It's worth it. The actually a particularly fun reading, and it's fun in English too. Comes from Cicero's De Senectute, which means on old age. Which, if you ever want to appreciate old age more, basically, read De Senectute. And this particular one is basically why love's better when you're old, because you've lost pleasure. So check it out. It's an interesting argument. The whole book, it's worth your time. But anyway, that's a little Cicero. What'd you say?
Which one is it?
It's on the
like,
I see it as the second, like the next page. It's my page 114, and it's called On the Pleasures of Love in Old Age.
Have we translated from that before? I feel like we have.
I think we have, yeah. I think we've translated from De Senectute
I
before.
think that sounds familiar.
But the great thing about Cicero is one is all his writings are preserved. Two is they're all on what they're called. Like, I love that about ancient essays. Like, they're really called on responsibility, on old age, on friendship, on, and it's like, oh, I want to read about friendship. Oh, I'll pick up De Amicitia. Oh, I want to read about responsibility. I'll pick up about De Otio. Anyway, I love, and they're short too, which is great, because they didn't have to reach like a publisher's minimum page count to publish a book, which is nice, because they're pretty punchy. They're punchy little bits. So anyway, so it's fun.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You've probably referred to this before, but what do you recommend for a good English to Latin or Latin to English dictionary?
The one that I would say for y'all's level to buy is I would buy the Chambers Murray Latin. It's at a level of Latin where it's actually starting to give you multiple understandings of words in context. So kind of a silly but maybe fitting English example would be something like, when does the word bad mean bad versus good? Right? Sorry, I feel really unhip when I use this example. But anyway, or cool or something. It was cool to the touch versus he looked cool versus I received a cool reception from my mother-in-law or something like that. Anyway, so what Chambers Murray does is it breaks that down more clearly, whereas other dictionaries, what like our students would start with would be the Oxford Pocket Dictionary, which is fine. It's just not as precise of a dictionary. Yeah, where you could actually say, oh, how would I know whether that's, you know, cool or cool or cool? And they give you kind of footnotes if you ever wanted to look up examples. So, yeah, that's what I would go with for sure. Yeah. All right. I think that's it for this week, or this month rather. We'll see you guys in a month. Good to see you guys. Take care.
Have a good night.
Y'all too. By the way, we really enjoyed the symphony.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Did you like it?
so much.
Isn't that such just a great concert hall, great production?
It was, and the seats were great.
Were you next to that old man with his mother?
You know, there weren't, I mean, actually the front row, and like the front 2 rows really, I think there were only like 2 couples besides us in the whole row.
Oh, really?
I think maybe more folks were perhaps going on. It was a nasty night. I will say that's probably a part of it
So it
too.
worked in your
It was pretty. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, we were like, wow, we've got tons of space to ourselves. And,
Well, I'd like for you to write about the evening and entitle it On the Symphony.
on the symphony, yeah. Well, actually, I was going to ask, I mean, this is just, it's, when I would go to symphony, we would go to shows that we kind of knew, and then we would prep. And I didn't realize this until I was there. But it's like, oops, I just realized that's still running.